Okay, it's time to make things simple again. We know that Einstein was a fucking idiot. We know that space and time are neither forces nor fields and can act on nothing. To have great wisdom and understand the forces and inertias and accelerations of nature, there's absolute irreducible simplicity. Absolute irreducible simplicity. Gravity does not exist. Well, what do you mean by that bullshit? Of course we know gravity exists. Obviously things fall to Earth, the Earth goes around the sun, etc., etc. So what does it mean to say that gravity does not exist? There are only two principles in the universe: inertia and the loss of inertia. Inertia and acceleration, force and motion. All things divergent are the loss of inertia. All things convergent are acceleration and return to inertia. Remember our bicycle wheel analogy last video and the video before that? What do we have here on the left side and what do we have here on the right side? The left side you think, well, we have incoherency. On the right side we have coherency. On the left side we have both gravity and we have our pre-magnet. Here's our magnet right here. Let's say this magnet hasn't been induced yet. So we have a mass that has gravity regardless of whether it's been induced and made coherent. That is what we're talking about when we refer to a magnet. Magnetism exists from the smallest atom to this magnet to the Earth's magnetosphere. What does it mean to say that gravity does not exist? Well, there's only one field. Only one field, that's the ether, that's inertia. Gravity does not exist. Gravity is polarization only. So, everything in space, in the cosmos, in the universe is either a move towards space, the creation of space, not in space, but space is a posterior attribute to divergent fields, or a move towards counter space. What do we know about gravity? Let's say on the left side we have an infinitely large mass of some variety. Gravity, of course, exists in any object, although it's rather hard to measure unless you have some really expensive instrumentation. So, here we have our so-called gravity. We have an incoherent mass, say a planet, a moon, an asteroid, a comet hurtling towards the sun or towards Earth. And on the right we have coherency. We not only have coherency, we have obviously polarization. As we've already stated, even from the tiniest little hydrogen atom to the magnet to the Earth, any phenomenal dielectric condensate, i.e. matter, has polarization. We know that polarization is necessitated of any loss of inertia because counterspatial inertia is at the center of all space. Remember, there are no fields in space. There's only one field. Space is a posterior attribute to divergent centrifugal fields. That is why our dielectric inertial plane on the magnet is self-centering. Here we have the dielectric inertial plane, let's say, of a sphere magnet. We have centrifugal reciprocation and centripetal reassimilation. Left we have incoherency, and the right we have coherency. Here we have a move towards counter space. Here we have a move towards counter space. So, what's the difference between the mass on the left and the mass on the right? Polarization only, polarization and coherency. There is no such thing as gravity. Space nor time acts on nothing. Large masses cause acceleration. Acceleration due to what? Remember, there are only two quote-unquote movements in the cosmos. A move towards divergence or a move towards convergence. Respectively, a move towards counter space or a move towards the creation of space. We incorrectly think of as into space, but that's incorrect. Space is a posterior attribute of divergent centrifugal loss of inertia or the reciprocation of inertia. So, we don't have a magnet. don't have magnetism, and we don't have gravity as two autonomous entities. What do we have? We either have polarization or polarization incoherency. So what does that mean? Well, gravity doesn't exist. So we know that space and time doesn't work on anything. Neither one are a force nor a field. Here we have an incoherent mass. Let's call it an asteroid. Let's call it a comet. The Earth, a moon. Acceleration. Omnidirectional, incoherent acceleration, a move towards counter space. Because this would be a move towards space, correct? Right. No object, large or small, either the size of an atom or the size of the moon or the Earth, moves in this direction, correct? Right, that's force and motion. Gravity is inertia and acceleration. It has nothing to do with space, has nothing to do with time. So in an incoherent mass, we have a movement towards counter space, towards inertia and acceleration, towards the avoidance of space. That's why you can take this block magnet or a disc magnet, and if you're able to break it up into little pieces with a hammer, it will always form a what? A sphere. That's correct. Any magnet, cone-shaped, cube-shaped, ring-shaped, donut-shaped, I don't care what the fucking magnet is, how large or how small it is, if you're able to break it up into pieces, it will form a sphere. Always. Now, why does it form a sphere? Well, that's extremely obvious. So now we just got done looking at gravity. We know that gravity doesn't exist. It's not an autonomous entity. We define gravity as something autonomous from the only field that there is, and autonomous from magnetism. Here we have polarization and coherency. Counter space is necessitated to be there. Let's say this is a sphere magnet. Dielectric inertial plane, centripetal, convergence. We have divergence here, convergence there. How is this any different than gravity? Coherency and polarization. Remember, not a single atom, not a single piece of phenomenon, the entire universe is devoid of polarization. What we have here is coherency. Remember a laser analogy? 5 watts of light you can't read by. 5 watts of laser light is coherent and will burn your ass or permanently scorch out the back of your retinas and blind you for the rest of your life. It's the same reason you can take 10 people dancing out of step on the second floor of a rickety building, and you can dance all day long until the end of time and nothing will happen. But if you get all 10 of those people dancing on the second floor of a rickety building, dancing in sync, will bring the whole fucking house down. Coherency. Coherency. So what is a magnet? A magnet is, remember, there's no such thing as any phenomena without polarization. It's absolutely impossible. From the hydrogen atom to this magnet, to this chalkboard, the Earth, every bit of matter is polarized. A magnet is defined by polarization and coherency. All you've done is you've subdivided inertia and acceleration and force and motion into coherency. Here we have inertia and acceleration. Look, forms a cross. Here's counter space. Look, if this were the Earth and it were incoherent, this would also be the counterspatial sink. Oh my goodness. So coherent or incoherent, counter space is counter space is counter space. Right? Right. And here we have in our magnet polarization, divergence, force and motion. So, we know that magnetism is not a field. We know that gravity doesn't exist. Well, it still doesn't make any sense. We know that gravity exists. I throw something up in the air, it falls back on my head and kills me. Asteroids, meteorites fall to Earth. I should know, I collect meteorites. I've seen a few meteorites fall to Earth. I even found one once. What do you mean that gravity does not exist? Because gravity does not exist. Here we have our four supposed fields: gravity, electricity, magnetism, dielectricity. Here we have inertia and acceleration. Over here we have force and motion. So on the left side we have inertia and acceleration, force and motion. Everything over here is divergent, is spatial. Everything over here is CS, counterspatial. What is gravity? What do we define as gravity? Gravity and electricity are hybrid. Z-axis radial dielectric, transverse electrical and magnetic. Electricity doesn't terminate into magnetism, rather as magnetism by the loss of its dielectric Z-axis radial component. We speak about gravity, what are we talking about? We're talking about mass phenomena, a heap of massive phenomena which has counterspatial attribute of acceleration. Well, gee, that's exactly what magnetism is. We have a magnet, it's polarized. A magnet is polarized and coherent. So where does gravity and magnetism differ? Referring to the magnet, which has magnetism. Obviously, every atom in the universe has magnetism, has polarization. Why does anything have polarization? Because counter space necessitates it. Just as you cannot make a line without a point, and just as you can't make a point without a line. There's no such thing as a line or a point in the universe. There's only a point line. Very simple. There's no such thing as a principle without an attribute. And move towards counter space. So gravity doesn't exist. It's what we define as a conglomeration of mass which has a move towards counter space. The center, the antinomy of all divergence. Here we got gravity. This is no different than the magnet. Polarization, i.e. divergence, force and motion, necessitates convergence, necessitates reciprocation. All gravity is, as we are defining it in connotation, referring to denotation as counterspace, which nobody knows and nobody talks about because people are idiots. We have to understand projective geometry. If you don't understand space and counterspace, you're never going to understand anything. You have inertia and acceleration over here, counterspace, force and motion, and space over here. Not into space, but as the creation of space. Magnetism is not a field. It is a field modality. Everything over here on the right side, including electricity and what we call gravity, is a field modality. It's the loss of inertia, just like our bicycle wheel. Remember we were talking about the bicycle wheel before? Let's say we got a spoke. Let's call the spoke in a bicycle wheel inertia or dielectricity, i.e. the ether. Okay, so are we then to conclude from our bicycle wheel here that, say a spoke is the blow, a sprung spoke is something different than a spoke? Why no, it's not. Well, the sprung spoke we're now calling magnetism. Oh, so that's a field modality. Yes, that's right. Imagine a bicycle wheel with infinite spokes reciprocating centrifugally, returning centripetally. So what's gravity? A move towards counter space. Incoherent mass conglomeration, move towards counter space. In the end, all we have is inertia. And we have the expression of the loss of inertia as defined by the attributes it has is expressed from the loss of inertia, either coherent or incoherent. Incoherent being gravity, coherent being magnetism, although we don't recognize it on the atomic scale, but we do recognize it in this huge magnet over here. So, what's the difference between gravity and magnetism? Absolutely nothing. Gravity does not exist. We're talking about coherent versus incoherent. All is a move towards counter space. It doesn't matter if this is a magnet, which it is. I'm showing polarization and coherency right now. P and C. So here we have the magnet. We still have counter space right here. So here's our magnet. Here's our dielectric inertial plane. The loss of inertia, reciprocation, centrifugal, centripetal. So, now let's look at, say, the Earth. We have an incoherent, infinite amount of atoms comprising any mass from a single hydrogen atom to an asteroid, a moon, a meteorite, doesn't matter what it is. We still have the same move towards counter space, except it is not coherent, but it is polarized. An incoherent mass of polarized matter is still a move towards counter space. Gravity does not fucking exist. Space nor time are neither fields nor forces. Mother Nature is really, really simple. Gravity is only an expression of ignorance by humanity of a move towards counter space, inertia, and acceleration. So, how does that differ from the magnet? It doesn't differ. It only differs in that we have coherency. In the case of the magnet, here we still have our counterspatial point. Think about it a second. Think. Think. You get it yet? Think. Here's our magnet. Let's say this is our north pole, this is our south pole. We have force and motion here. Centrifugal, divergence, the creation of space. Here we have centripetal on the south pole, centripetal on the north pole, our dielectric inertial plane, magnetic reciprocation, centrifugal, centripetal, centrifugal, centripetal. So here's our magnet. Instead of mere polarization, we have in our magnet an infinite number of, by induction or charge from our magnetizer coils, coherent atoms, just like our laser versus our light bulb. Here we have coherency. And what happens when we put two light poles together? There's no such thing, as I've told you 100 times before. Let's say this is two south poles. There's no such thing as magnetic acceleration or attraction. Magnetic attraction, and there's no such thing as magnetic repulsion. You only have move towards space or counter space, depending on the force vector motions of the polarity of the magnet. So south on south, what you refer to as magnetic repulsion, is force and motion. Let's say we have two magnets here coming together, north pole here, south pole here, north pole here, south pole here. What you call magnetic attraction is I and A, inertia and acceleration. It's that fucking simple. That's why if I put two of these magnets together, north on south, I put my finger between them, it'll break my fucking finger. But if I put them north on north pole or south on south pole, and if I had the strength to squeeze them together really tight and I let one of them go, it goes shooting across the room and right through the goddamn drywall. Right through the drywall. So one will actually break my finger, but if I flip it over, if I had the strength to do it, which of course nobody does, and I'm going to let one of them go, from rest, by the way, clamped together from rest, if I let one of them go, it'll go shooting right through this drywall and probably another sheet of drywall, as I showed you in another video using much smaller magnets. So, no such thing as magnetic attraction or repulsion. Like on like polarity, force and motion. Unlike polarities come together, we have inertia and acceleration. So F and M, or I and A. Force and motion, or inertia and acceleration. That is coherency. Polarization and coherency. Gravity does not exist. All is a move towards counter space. Here we have the counter space, the dielectric inertial plane. And we had a large massive object, what's the difference? People don't understand this. Academia doesn't get it. Academia has never even talked about this. Nobody in academia has ever talked about it. Incoherent mass. Same thing. There's no coherency. Still, it's a move towards counter space. Doesn't matter if this is the Earth or if this is the magnet. The antithesis of space is counter space, i.e. inertia. All is a move towards counter space. Doesn't matter if it's a magnet, an asteroid, the Earth and the Moon, the Earth and the Sun, it doesn't matter. We know that space and time doesn't act on anything, contrary to what that fucking retard, that pseudo-intellectual mental midget, that's syphilitic moron Einstein and the rest of his pathetic idiots in the cult of quantum state. There's no such thing as space and time acting on anything, because space nor time are either fields nor forces. They can't act on anything. Tesla said the very same thing. All is a move towards counter space in an incoherent body. Obviously, every little atom, no matter how many, is polarized, from a hydrogen atom or otherwise. A conglomeration of atoms are either coherent or they're incoherent, as in the case of a large body. That is why there's no such fucking thing, excuse my language, as gravity. If you don't understand that, I think I've already explained it like 5 or 6 times and you're never going to get it. So now we've eliminated gravity. Now we know there's only 2 things in the universe, principles. Force and motion, and inertia and acceleration. Here we have magnetism, polarization. Here we have counter space. So what's the opposite of polarization? What's the opposite of polarization? Polarization is nothing other than an expression of, an extrapolation of, as implied. That's right. Now, the question becomes again, why does a magnet have 2 poles? It doesn't have 2 poles. A magnet does not have 2 poles. Well, yeah, it does. There's a North Pole and there's a South Pole. You're just fucking crazy. No, it doesn't. Polarization equals space. Here's counter space. Necessitated loss of inertia necessitates polarization, because counter space is always self-seeking. You can see that with this ferrofilm, you can see it with the ferrocell, you can see it with a dozen other testing devices. There's nobody on Earth that can refute that. Nobody. Period. You can see it with a dozen different testing criteria, more than a dozen. Nobody understands this. Counter space. There we go. So what does polarization mean? It's none other than an extrapolation in principle in reference to the creation of space. Not into space, but the creation of space. Here is counter space. Here's our magnet. Here's the Earth. Same thing. Coherency versus coherency and polarization. A large mass is simply a large lump of incoherent polarized matter, i.e. gravity. Still have the same thing, a move towards CS, counter space. Force and motion, inertia and acceleration. Counter space is inertia and acceleration. Force and motion is magnetism, is divergence, is necessitatively the loss of inertia, which is expressed in other field modalities as gravity, electricity, or magnetism. Everything over here is inertia and acceleration, is the ether. Everything over here is force and motion, is space. Space is a posterior attribute to divergent losses of inertia. Space is not a thing in itself, neither is time. They do not act on anything. So, if you understand this, then you understand more than about anybody does. If you don't understand it, then I've explained it 5 times. I might have to dumb it down a little bit more. I'll have to find new ways to dumb it down. Thanks for watching. You have to forgive me for making these videos at 3 o'clock in the morning.